So I'm a little puzzled here. Are you all upset if we go back to Revelation 1 and do the first three verses? Yes, that is a typo. I will fix that for the publication after the fact. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Glad that you are here. It is finally time. Darren is literally excited right now. It is time to get into Revelation chapter 20. Isn't it interesting that of all the sections in this letter, this is the one that we are most anticipating, as Milligan's Island is saying there. So good stuff. All right. So, yep, we're going to jump in and we're going to go fairly slowly through this section and indeed the next several sections because, first of all, it is highly controversial and it's difficult in some ways. But I want to just make sure that we get it, at least, that you get what I'm saying. Whether I persuade you of my position or not, I want to go slowly enough that we can move along together. I'm thinking we will probably do our next partners meeting, not this Saturday, but the following Saturday. That'll give us plenty of time to get through this section. I'm sure there'll be lively discussion there. If you want to join us, become a partner, go to crosstocrown.org. There's a link in the show notes and support a ministry, and you can join us for a live discussion on these things. But I think that will be not this Saturday, but the next. But I'll keep you posted. All right, so the first thing that we have to talk about before we look at the actual text here is the whole concept of literal interpretation. Hence my thumbnail and Darren's clever statement there. We have been surrounded by, and many of you come from a theological background that amplifies what they call literal interpretation. This is the driving hermeneutic for dispensationalism. And even if you've never heard that term or used that term, if you believe in a pre-tribulational rapture of the church and a 7-year tribulation with Israel, or for Israel, and then the Lord coming back and setting up his kingdom in literal Jerusalem and reigning for a literal 1,000 years, then you are an adherent to dispensationalism. Or even if you think the rapture is going to take place mid-tribulation or post-tribulation, but you still see that's what we're waiting for is rapture and so on, then you are in the dispensational camp. And the driving interpretive filter is what they call a literal interpretation. Now, here's the thing. They're not consistent with their interpretation of literal. Nobody is. None of us can be. So we need to talk about this briefly here at the beginning. Remember, Revelation is filled with images, visions, strange sights that John observes. And I have told you all the way through what I believe is the key to understanding these things. And in a moment, I will ask you if you remember that. But first, let's just remind ourselves of something here. Look at chapter 19, verse 11. We looked at this last week. John says, I saw heaven having been opened, and behold, a white horse. And he who is sitting on it is called Faithful and True. Okay, so John definitely, I think everybody would agree, John saw a white horse. And he saw someone sitting on a white horse, which we all believe this to be Jesus that he's seeing here, right? Question is it a literal white horse? Is Jesus riding around in heaven? Is he going to ride around on earth on a white horse? Is that the intent of the vision? Verse 12 says, his eyes are as a flame of fire. So does Jesus have those laser eyes, the Bitcoin eyes that we see on X and other platforms? Is that what we're supposed to draw from this? Are his eyes actually on fire? On his head are many crowns. How many crowns? Is Jesus actually on a white horse with a stack of crowns on his head? And does he have a name written that no one knows except himself? Is he clothed with a garment covered with blood? Again, John saw this, but is the intent to communicate that Jesus actually is wearing a garment that is covered with blood? And his name is called the Word of God. That's not his name. And the armies in heaven are following him on white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and pure. Out of his mouth proceeds a sharp sword. Are we to believe that Jesus has a sword literally coming out of his mouth? And he's going to go around with the sword coming out of his mouth and strike nations with it? I mean, how would that work? So he's going to reign in Jerusalem. Now, there's nothing about Jerusalem here, which is part of the problem with the dispensational view of this text. There's nothing about Jerusalem here. They have to pull that somewhere else. But, assuming a literal interpretation kind of thing, are we to believe that Jesus is going to ride around the nations on planet Earth on a white horse with a sword literally coming out of his mouth, and he's going to strike nations? How would he do that? How do you hold a sword in your mouth? And then it says he's going to rule them with a rod of iron. How do you rule nations? Do you go one at a time and whack individuals? Well, while you're whacking these individuals with your rod of iron, what are those people doing? And on his garment and on his thigh, the name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and so on. So you see the point. We don't take any of this imagery literally. Dispensationalists don't believe that Jesus actually has a sword sticking out of his mouth. They understand that image is communicating something. Just as I've told you all the way through this study, Jesus is neither a lion nor a lamb. You understand that, right? Because in Revelation, he's both. Well, which one is he? Is he a little sheep-like creature? Is he a roaring lion? No, he's neither of those, and we know that. And I'm not aware of anybody in the history of biblical interpretation that thinks that Jesus is actually an animal that we call a lamb. So we so easily, even unconsciously, understand that when it says he's a lamb, on the throne is the lamb, that's not describing an accurate description of the reality of Jesus. Instead, it is communicating something about Jesus, right? Everybody's tracking with that? And yet when we come to chapter 20, a lot of people say, obviously, everything here has to be literal, except parts that they decide are not literal. And I'll just tell you, I think it's difficult for me, and probably for you even, to have an open mind here of saying what is being communicated through the images. In other words, I'm acknowledging as I read Revelation 20, I have to be mentally on guard against assuming these images are literal. Does that make sense? Are you tracking with me? So I just want you to understand, nobody takes Revelation literally in the typical use of the word literal. As someone has mentioned this before, if you understand literal in its historic sense, then I take it literally. But the way it's usually used is lion equal lion, and lamb equal lamb, and sword equal sword, rather than representing something. Okay? So all that to say, This is a book of symbols. This is a letter of symbols and images, but there are some things that are clear and the meaning is clear, and that's where we need to camp. So let me ask you, do you remember what I told you? And this goes back to our study of Zechariah. When you're looking at these apocalyptic portions of Scripture, there is something that we are to hone in on, to really focus on in terms of our interpretation. And it's not the images. Does anybody remember? I will be so happy if anybody remembers any of this. I see lots of comments here. Let me take a look at these real quick while I'm giving you a chance to answer, see if anybody remembers. I've made this point. Again, I can't remember how much I've said it in Revelation. I know I said it back in Zechariah, but there is one area in all these visions that we are to focus on if we're going to understand it correctly. Dale says, Doug with the bait and switch back to the foundation of the That's good. Y'all thought I was trying to mislead you by putting chapter 1. No, that was just a mistype. It's chapter 20. Daniel says, I knew you wouldn't go to the Old Testament prophets. I almost changed my mind again on yesterday morning. The short season of Satan. Yeah, we'll talk about that. That's not... I understand there's a movement now dealing with the little season or something like that I'm guessing is not something you want to get involved with. Or as I call it, the leader, not the literal interpretation. Oh, the not so literal, yeah. If it's literal, why couldn't it also be near literal, like John says? Yeah, and so I say everybody, we all must do this. We all must pick and choose what portions are literal. Because there are some things that I believe are literal. Everybody does. Everybody that interprets the Revelation reads some things as literal and some things as figurative. That nobody is able to avoid that. All right. William David Bugg says he preached on this and people walked out. Yeah, that happens. Matt says, don't know what you've been taught, haven't been here, but all points to Christ. John 5:39. I'm not sure what that's referring to, but if you haven't been with us, then be careful of making comments here, Matt. The rest of us have been walking through this together for a long time, so it might be good for you to go back and catch up. All right, so I see a lot of things coming here. I'll show you what I'm getting at, then remind you of these things. Again, I haven't made a big deal of it in Revelation, but all right. So chapter 20, I saw a messenger, an angel, right, coming down out of heaven, having the key of the abyss and a great chain over his hand. Okay, so he sees this angel, this messenger, coming down out of heaven, and he's got the key to the abyss. Now we've seen this kind of thing already. There was another angel. Well, I'm assuming it's another angel. We're not told if it's the same one or not, who had the key to the abyss. And remember, he opened it and let all these demonic forces out, and they went and caused great pain and suffering to the land. So this one has the key to the abyss and a great chain over his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, the ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. And he cast him into the abyss and shut him up and put a seal on him that he may no longer lead the nations astray until the 1,000 years may be completed. After these, it is necessary for him to be loosed a short time. Okay, so this image is not particularly difficult. Angel comes out of heaven. He's got the key. He grabs hold of the dragon. He binds him, presumably with the chain, and then he throws him into the abyss, shuts him up, seals him in there for 1,000 years. After these, it is necessary for him to be loosed a short time. And I assume that's what the little season folks are making a big deal of. All right. That phrase, it is necessary for him to be loosed for a short time. That word, it is necessary, is frequently used in the scripture to indicate something is necessary because of the plan. God's plan. This is what he is determined will happen, and oftentimes it has been prophesied, it's been foretold that this will happen, so it's necessary, it must take place. So not must because something else requires it, but must because this is God's plan and purpose. Okay? So Satan is going to be bound and sealed in the abyss for 1,000 years, and then after the 1,000 years have reached their goal, this is that telos family of words, after the 1,000 years have reached the goal, then Satan, the serpent, the dragon, is going to be loosed from the abyss for a short time. Okay? So again, pretty straightforward here as far as the details of the image. Now, here is the key, in my opinion, for interpreting apocalyptic literature. And if you didn't go through our Zechariah series, go back through that sometime, and you'll see that I emphasize it there as well. We easily get almost distracted by the imagery, trying to figure out what's that element of the figure and what's that element of the visions communicating. And we want them to be visual allegories almost, where every component has a meaning, and we think we can find the meaning, and people do. And the problem with that, or the challenge with that, is there's virtually no way to prove any of it. But when the text tells us the purpose in plain language, that's where we need to camp. For instance, back in Zechariah, the 4 horsemen, after that image, it says they patrolled the earth or the land, and the land is settled and at rest. That gave us some indication. And then the branch and the shoot coming later, and then it tells us what that shoot is going to do. That's where we need to camp. Well, here we are told the significance of the serpent or the dragon being sealed in the abyss. And it's this right here in verse 3, that he may no longer lead the nations astray. You see that? This is the purpose. This is what is significant about this vision of the dragon being sealed, that he may no longer lead the nations astray. What's the implication of that? Prior to him being sealed in the abyss, he was leading nations astray. This does not necessarily mean that the dragon doesn't do anything over the 1,000 years. Now, maybe he doesn't do anything. You see what I'm getting at? We tend to think of that imagery as he's put in this abyss, this pit or whatever, and sealed over, and he can't do anything. He's imprisoned in there and has no ability to do anything. That may or may not be true. I don't think we can know that. But we are told specifically what the significance of him being in the abyss is. It's he cannot lead the nations astray any longer, or at least during the 1,000 years. It is crucial that you see that. That is plain English. That is, or Greek. That is not difficult. We are told what the purpose is. So what's going on during this 1,000 years is the dragon is no longer allowed to lead the nations astray. But he was before this. So important to get that. I mean, one of the refrains, one of the pushbacks I get sometimes when I'm talking about this is, well, you're saying Satan is bound. Well, if Satan is bound, that doesn't really mean much because look at all the evil in the world. Well, it doesn't say when Satan's bound there won't be any evil anywhere. It just says he can't lead the nations astray. Now, we've seen this already. Right, so going back to chapter 12. A great sign is seen in the sky, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon on her feet, and has a garland of 12 stars. Again, this is not a literal person. She has a child in her womb, and she cries out, travailing and about to bring forth. And there was seen another sign in the sky, and behold, a great fire-colored dragon, having 7 heads, 10 horns, 7 crowns on his heads. Again, we saw this. We went through this. All of these images tie to the beast, who is Rome. So the dragon is influencing the beast, and the beast is influencing others, so on. With his tail it drags a third, and so on. The dragon stood before the woman who's about to bring forth, that when she may bring forth, he may devour the child. And she brought forth a male who is about to rule the nations with a rod of iron. That is grabbing this phrase that we see over and over again in the Old Testament of, the Messiah. So this woman is about to give birth to the Messiah. She flees in the wilderness. She has a place made ready for her, and so on. Then there's this war. Michael and his messengers are against the dragon. So there's this war between Michael and the dragon, and so on. Then here's verse 9. The great dragon who was cast forth, and lest we aren't sure who this is, it's the old serpent who's called the devil and Satan, who is leading the whole world astray. That's what the dragon is doing. That's what the devil and Satan, that's what he's doing. He's leading the whole world astray. He is cast down to the earth. And then there's this great voice that says, now came the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ, because the accuser of our brothers was cast down. So we're going to need to keep this in mind as we get into the rest of chapter 20 here. So Satan is leading the world astray. He's cast down to the earth. And at that time, when he's cast down to the earth, that's when salvation and power and the kingdom of Christ comes about. The accuser is cast down out of heaven. They overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb, the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life to death. So those who are faithful to the Lamb will be faithful to death, tied to the time frame of the dragon being cast down to earth. Because of this, be glad, you heavens, but woe to those inhabiting the earth and the sea, because the devil went down to you having great wrath, having known that he has a short time. A short time for what? So are you following here? So the dragon wants to destroy the Messiah, who's going to rule the nations with a rod of iron. Okay? Think about that. The male son is going to rule. He's about to rule the nations with a rod of iron. If he's about to do that, then he hasn't been doing that up to this point, right? So up to this point, this male son has not been ruling the nations. Who has been ruling the nations? The dragon. But he is cast down out of heaven to earth. He can't kill the son because the son is snatched away. He's leading the whole earth astray. The kingdom of Christ is coming. That's when Christ is going to rule the nations. And now when this dragon is cast to the earth, he knows his time is short. He knows his rule is coming to an end. Now, I don't know how he knows this. We're not told that. But apparently he knows he's going to be cast into the abyss and no longer be allowed to lead the nations astray, to rule the nations. Now, this is not unique to Revelation in terms of Satan ruling the nations. Remember in the narrative of Jesus being tempted by Satan or the devil. Luke 4, the devil having brought him up, so the devil brings Jesus up to a high mountain, showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. Now, there are probably lots of questions that might arise here, but just catch the general flow here. So Satan takes Jesus up and shows him all the kingdoms of the world. Now, this is the word oikomene. For those of you that follow this, it's not cosmos. So all the kingdoms maybe of the empire, you could say. Inhabited earth is how it's usually translated. And the devil said to him, to you, Jesus, I will give all this authority. I will give you the authority over the kingdoms of the world. And I'll give you their glory. Now notice this line. Because it has been delivered to me, and to whomever I will, I give it. You see this? The devil says to Jesus, if you'll just worship me, I will give you authority over all the kingdoms of the earth. It has been given to me, and I can give it to whomever I wish. And notice, Jesus does not say, Satan, you're wrong. You're a liar. You don't have authority over the kingdoms. That's not what he says. He quotes Deuteronomy saying, nope, I'm not going to worship you. You shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Do you see this? The devil was apparently given the authority over the kingdoms of the world prior to the coming of Christ. And even the phrasing, I give it to whomever I want, is interesting. Ties right into the dragon who empowers the beast who represents Rome. He gave the power of that kingdom to the Roman Empire. Again, it's not the only place this kind of language occurs. In 2 Corinthians, Paul is writing to the church there, and he's talking about the gospel being veiled. He says, if our good news is also veiled, it is veiled in those who are perishing, in whom the God of this age blinded the minds of the unbelieving. He calls Satan here the God of this age. This is the word theos. I can't remember if we've talked about it here. I've talked about it in lots of different scenarios. But Elohim, and I know some of you are Michael Heiser fans, and he makes a good, he does a good job of handling all this. Elohim, gods, that's the Hebrew word, is plural. And there are other gods in the Old Testament besides Yahweh. And here, Paul uses the Greek word theos to describe the one who's blinded those who are perishing. Calls him the God of this age. In Ephesians 2, he says to the Ephesian folks, you being dead in your trespasses and sins, and we immediately want to go if you're reformed thinking, you want to go to total depravity and sinful nature and all that, that's not where he goes. You were dead in your trespasses and sins in which you once walked, not according to some innate depravity. You were dead in your trespasses and sins in which you once walked according to the age of this world, according to the ruler of the authority of the air and the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience. Do you see that? In this section, at least, the reason the Ephesians were walking in sin and dead in their sins and trespasses was because of an external power, the ruler of the authority of the air, the spirit that is working in the sons of disobedience. Now, he's not named Satan or the devil here, but it sure sounds similar. 1 John, this is 5:18. We know, or we have known, that everyone who has been begotten of God does not sin, but he who is begotten of God keeps sin, and the evil one does not touch him. We have known that we are of God, and the whole world lies of the evil one, or in the evil one. And did I pull up one more here? Yeah, we'll say that. So the point is this idea of this one spiritual being, Satan, the devil, the dragon, ruling the kingdoms of the earth and leading them astray is consistent through the scripture. And in chapter 12, the dragon is kicked out of heaven. He's not allowed to be up there in his function as prosecuting attorney, which we've talked about. He's kicked down to the earth, and he is roaming around like a roaring lion, you might say, furious at the followers of the male son who was whisked up to heaven, and he knows his time is short, and he's seeking to devour those who hold to the commands of Christ. And here in Revelation 20, we are told he's going to be put into the abyss and chained there for 1,000 years so that he can no longer lead the nations astray. Do you see the two things going on here? To put it very simply, if you haven't been following, put it very simply. To this point in the story, right? We've had the bowls of wrath, the seals, all of the destruction of Jerusalem, the punishment of God upon Jerusalem, and the pronouncement of the defeat of Babylon, the great whore. At that time, the kingdom of Jesus, the kingdom of the Christ and of his saints, comes to be. Up to this point, Satan has been ruling the kingdoms of the earth and leading the nations astray. When Jesus takes his throne, he's going to send the angel to bind Satan, put him in the abyss, seal it over so that he cannot lead the nations astray. Why? Because Jesus is ruling the nations with a rod of iron. He is claiming his inheritance. He is bringing out his wrath and fury, like Psalm 2 we've talked about. So he binds up the one who is leading them astray. And now Jesus is conquering the nations and either judging them in their rebellion or winning them to his throne to obey him. And that's what's been happening since then. And that's what is happening during this time where Satan is sealed in the abyss. Do you see the point? Again, I don't know whether Satan is actively doing anything or not, but he has lost his authority over the nations to lead them astray. That's the implication of this binding and being thrown into the abyss. And then we get these sort of ominous words at the end. At some point, when the 1,000 years have reached their goal, he's going to be loosed for a brief period. Again, presumably to try to lead the nations astray again. And we'll get a little bit more about that as we go through the chapter. All right, so again, I know I keep saying them, but put simply, what I think is going on here is sometime in that first century, at the near the 70 A.D. period, because so many of these visions are tied to God's wrath on Jerusalem. At that point, Satan, his authority over the nations is removed, or suspended, I suppose is more accurate. And Jesus takes his throne and his kingdom, and he now begins to rule the earth and take the nations as his inheritance in his kingdom. You tracking with that so far? There is one other brief point I want to mention, but let me see if there's any comments that I need to address here. The nations are times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Yeah, that I'm not sure when you said that, Alfred. That's if you're talking about Romans 11, that's not the 1,000 years. No, that's not it. Is the 1,000 years literal or symbol? We'll come back to that in a moment. Can't be literal. 1,000 years isn't a fixed number. Feels like it should be a long time. Yeah, feelings don't matter. Yeah, we'll come back and talk about all that in a moment. Does he lead the whole world or just the known world? What would be the difference? Not sure what the practical difference of that would be. Darren says, I think the 1,000 years draws upon Second Temple eschatology ideas John would have been familiar with. Yeah, I think that's likely. Obviously, we have to stop short of certainty since we don't know how much interaction they had with literature. But short time between Old Covenant and New Covenant? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. There's no mention of the covenant here. I can see why you would ask that, but I don't think so. How would you explain the difference between there not being evil in the world and the nations not being led astray? So think about the 2 Corinthians 4 verse I read. The gospel is veiled, he said, by the God of this world. So as Satan's power was removed, now the gospel is going to bear fruit. And that's exactly what we see starting in the first century to our own day. So it's not simply about the evil. It's about the preventing the people from responding to Christ, that kind of thing. Well, I'm fine with 1,000 years being a brunch. I find the 1,000 years likely a day verse to interesting thing is other time frames in Revelation and Daniel are approximate but literal. What are you thinking of there, Darren? The crucifixion of Jesus did not accomplish what Satan thought it would. Maybe he figured he had a short time. Yeah, or we don't know for sure, but maybe he figured it out once that happened. Amy says, I wonder if the leading astray is an allusion to idolatry, which the whole world was guilty of then, but our modern age, many nations have done away with formal idolatry. Well, maybe so. I think probably all this is similar, but this is the salient point. The nations were under the control and the rule of the dragon, of Satan, and he was able to blind them the nations from the truth of God. Okay, so if his authority has been removed, that doesn't mean everybody just all of a sudden is responding to the right things. You see what I'm saying? In other words, don't assume that simply because Satan doesn't have the authority over the nations anymore, that every nation just all of us just immediately becomes faithful to Christ. That's not the intent. Yeah, Trekka, we will look at 2 Thessalonians down the road. Yep. Alfred, Deuteronomy 32, God gave the nations there, we're told, he gave them to the Elohim, and it appears now that Satan was the chief among the Elohim. So Satan's not mentioned in the Table of Nations or Deuteronomy 32, but it would appear now that we know that the God of those other Elohims, the higher God than those Elohim, was Satan. Of course, all under the absolute authority of the Most High God. Weren't gods in the Old Testament confined to specific geographic boundaries? Yeah, I think that's kind of what we're getting at here. Tower of Babel, the nations was established. Yes, at least what we just talked about, the division. Yeah, Darren's on it. Doug, you see the Christ's ascension when he said, "All power is given to me," as the beginning, or AD 70? Yeah, there's transition there. We've talked about this before. He was the king at his birth. He's worshipped as king. They bring, the Magi bring gifts and bow down to him as king, and so on. He's called the King of the Jews on the cross. He ascended. All authority was given to him. So I don't know that it's helpful to try to pin down those kind of things. We're just interpreting the story as it is revealed to us. And so at this time that we see here in Revelation, that's when the kingdom, we are told, is established in the sense that we're discussing it here. The order makes it seem like as long as Jesus is taking the nations as his inheritance kingdom, that Satan is still bound. Yeah, we'll get into a little bit more of that as we go through the upcoming verses, but yeah, kind of. Amy says, I agree, Jesus has all authority, but his dominion spreads nation by nation like Joshua. Yeah, that's a great word picture. Joshua taking the promised land of Canaan. Yeah, very good. All right, so last thing, let me address the timing issue, or the time issue. So as you probably have gathered from my explanation thus far, I don't think 1,000 years is intended to be literal. Now, we are in an interesting time. We have an interesting perspective because we are 2,000 years after this was begun, which is strange and a little complicating for understanding, right? I mean, so that leads some people to say, well, obviously, the 1,000 years isn't here yet. It's going to be literal Jesus reigning from Jerusalem on earth. Others in the traditional post-mill or old school post-mill view, would say the 1,000 years starts sometime, maybe hasn't even started yet, and then from whenever it begins, whenever the millennial kingdom and the golden age begins, that's when the 1,000-year countdown begins. But that's not how I approach this. Go back to the original audience. So you're one of those churches in Asia Minor, and you are at the beginning of the intense persecution that is coming upon the church by the hand of Rome. You hear stories of Christians in the capital city, being burned, and Nero breathing out his threats or whatever. The timing is, I don't want to get too locked in the timing. But Jesus is telling you, some of you are going to be put to death for your devotion to him. Persecution's ramping up. You're going to be required to burn incense to Caesar You're not allowed to do that. King Jesus doesn't want you to do that. They may burn down your houses. They may kill your family, right? It's going to get intense. And Jesus said, be faithful unto death. From that perspective, and you hear that John saw this vision, that the dragon who is energizing the beast, who is going to devour you, that dragon is going to be sealed in a pit for 1,000 years. That would be pretty motivating and encouraging to you. He loses, right? He's going to be removed from his power soon. 1,000 years is a long time from that perspective. And remember, Jesus already told them, if you are faithful to the end, you will rise and join me on the throne. So we together will defeat the beast and take the nations. And Satan will not be able to hinder our work in bringing the nations into the kingdom because he is going to be bound up. From that perspective, 1,000 years seems like a really long time and would have been encouraging the first century audience. So I don't think it's a little 1,000 years. I think Satan still is unable to lead the nations astray. Jesus is still building his kingdom. He is still taking the nations for himself. We've never had a period like other passages describe where the nations, for the most part, are bowing the knee to Christ. We haven't done that. For 2,000 years, the church has grown, the kingdom has grown, but nowhere near how the Bible describes it. So as I read it, who knows how, I don't see any reason to think it's going to be in the near future. I think the kingdom is going to continue to expand, and kings are going to continue to bow the knee to Jesus, and nations are going to continue to come to faith in Jesus, and there's going to be the increase of the peace that is promised in Isaiah 9, and an extended period of, dare I use the word, golden age on planet Earth. And then at some point, Satan is going to be released and allowed to bring an opposition, and then we will look at what it says is going to happen. So that's how I see it. You may see it differently. I just think it's important to lock in on the leading the nations astray is the purpose of his binding, and be careful about going beyond that without biblical warrant. Is he still bound then? I believe so. Could the 1,000 years be referring to a person? No, I don't see any reason why that would be. Any tie here to 2 Peter? Yeah, we'll look at 2 Peter. Or has he been defeated? Well, I don't know. He's defeated in the sense that I don't think he's allowed right now to deceive the nations, but he will be again someday. Darren leans toward a literal millennium. Okay. I always saw that when judgment took place of the old covenant people, that Satan was judged and cast into the lake of fire. Where is it? Where is that? William David Buck agrees with me. Cool. Matt says, all true, bind the nations, prince of this world, yet not able to raise his hand against Job without permission. Okay. Anyway, so that's how I see it. We will come back tomorrow and look at the next section. Have a great one, everybody. Grace and peace.